What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Player One versus the World, and I have the absolute pleasure of bringing on the lead writer on the Life is Strange comic series, none other than Emma Vieceli herself. Emma, how are you doing?
Hello, I'm okay. I feel like I should get it out of the way first, because some people listening to me might have seen me at a table at a convention before, and you'll know that I quite like talking. I'm quite like chatty. I have had laryngitis this year. I didn't have a voice for 3 months. So Adnan is the first person I'm speaking to in since about March officially. So my voice is, if I sound sleepy, it's just because I don't have a voice. So we'll muddle through.
Well, I appreciate taking a time out of the day, and we were trying to plan this since July, so we finally got it in place, and it's kind of worked out better with where Life is Strange is at the minute, and the recent launch of the first issue as well. Congratulations on that as well.
Yeah, or issue 13, as I call it.
So, and with that, I mentioned that because my first question is that this was originally intended to be a 4-part miniseries, and then, we have 12 issues from the first arc. We now have the second arc, 13 issues in. Just me saying that, what's the feeling like when I bring that up?
Oh, right, yeah. I mean, mostly positive, obviously. We went into it expecting, as you say, a 4-part series. I mean, it's amazing. I don't think anyone knew how it was going to go. I'm assuming you're the same as me. You've been in this game from the beginning. So those of us who know the game, we know how great a title it is. Obviously, to have it given a chance in comics was a huge deal. But I don't think anyone really knew what to expect or how the audience would react to it. So, yeah, I think I went in with this little kind of this is awesome. I'm going to plan this 4-parter. And we came up with something that worked. And then by issue 4, it was literally halfway through writing it, we started to get the sense that this isn't going to be finishing where we think it's going to finish. So the main thing is obviously positive. This is amazing. And I think with Partners in Time, what's especially exciting with Partners in Time is I've seen a few people referring to it as an arc, and I totally get it. The numbers are really confusing. I'm so sorry, guys. It's very confusing. I think people who read comics more are more used to it, but we've got a lot of readers for this series who are coming from games, understandably, so maybe they're a bit more confused, understandable. But yeah, what's exciting with Partners in Time is it's not an arc, it's a series. So the arc we're in now is actually called Tracks. So whereas Season 1 was very much renewed each arc, and there was a lot of kind of back and forth, with this, we've sort of been able to plan a series. So yeah, it's feeling quite different. I think that's when it really felt like this is a success. This is great. We get to tell more stories.
I'm glad that you cleared that up about the series thing as well, because I was a bit is it arc series? And I've obviously come more from a gaming background, but
right.
I was more interested in the comic series because you were involved with it. So that's where my interest came from it.
Oh,
and obviously, of course. And we've seen with the actual series where you started it, it was straight after the destruction of Arcadia Bay. Was that the logical starting point, not the other ending? Why was it done from that ending specifically?
So interestingly, I think it's all safe to say now because we're far enough down the line. What's interesting is when I was first approached about it, it was one of the stipulations that was the ending that the comic series was going to follow on from. What was really interesting is so I knew that was where it was going to lead on from. So then I got thinking about how, and bear in mind that for a good while it was just hard to get my head around the fact that it was even happening. I've been I've been a fan of the game since the first episode came out. I was doing fan art as things were being released. I ended up doing some work with Square during the first season, so the whole thing was this is crazy. So when I first went in to talk to Square and Titan, because there's a big group of people involved in this comic, there were a few ideas I threw at them. And then we had to sort of refine it down, go backwards and forwards, work out what was going to be feasible, what wasn't. Sorry, I'm going to talk. I'm terrible for this. Just ramble. You've asked me one question. I'm already blah, 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 blah. And why did she lose her voice? What could it be? So for which ending it followed on from, that was very much coming from the license holders. And it made sense to me that's the story we'd want to tell. Otherwise, it's mostly going to be poor Max sitting in a complete down, but going, So yeah, that was the start point I had. But as you know, and as anyone who's reading the comics know, I kind of, once I knew what I was going to be playing with, it was then how far can I push this? What can I do to try and tie in more of the nature of the game, you know.
Okay. And I'm glad that you mentioned that as well, because like, as I've read it, you know, I've seen the stuff about Tristan with the disengaged, the strings, the flickers. At one point, did you start developing those ideas? Like, that's where I want to kind of take the story down?
Yeah, flickers was like, I think that was the very first thing I thought. I think because, I mean, hell, even in my friend group, most of us who played the game chose different, you know, we're split on which endings we chose. We had lots of conversations about it. And that's just the binary ending at the very end. Like, we know how many choices there were throughout that game. Like, I've never played a game that left me having to put a controller down, walk around the garden for a while, scream a bit, and then come back in. Like, there were a lot of choices in that game. And I think one of the things I felt going in, regardless of whether I was writing how my game had ended or how a friend's game has ended, there were just so many choices were made. And it's such a good game for making you feel like you're so invested in that world and you've added to that world. A comic is a very different thing to a game, but I knew from the get-go that I had to find a way to somehow nod to those other choices. So flickers seemed an ideal. So they were almost like the start point for me. The original pitch was a very different comic to what we've got now, but even that one was still around flickers. So I think they were sort of the main thing I always wanted. I loved the idea of seeing ghosts of choices that were made or ghosts of what could have happened if you'd gone that way. And the readers are just so awesome. Like, as those first comics were being released and seeing people totally picking up on this stuff that was, some of it was really subtle. Like, it's complicated. And with Partners in Time, as you can probably tell already, it's going to be even more complicated. But throughout it, we were like, no, we know these guys. Like, we know these readers because they're the players of this game. We're people who analyze and we try and we extrapolate and we think about things. So I think we can do this with this comic. And like, so happy that we were proved right with that. People picked up on the flickers straight away.
Amazing. And with that as well, you mentioned the original pitch. Do you mind sharing what that was, or can you not share it?
I won't share it in detail because it probably bore you more than anything. But ultimately, it was, I mean, originally I was seeing stuff coming straight after the ending. There was never going to be a time jump. And in my mind, it was much more of the fallout of the storm, like literally the fallout of the storm. I think partly because I was thinking we only had 4 issues. It was going to be a coda. I was excited about the origins of the Vortex Club, and I got kind of into this idea of still kind of a ghost story and discovering stuff, but in the grounds of Blackwell, straight after the storm, while survivors were being found, while ruins were being picked through, things would be discovered, and they would be like, like clues as to, it would lead into stuff to do with the Vortex Club, stuff to do with a certain side character in the game who was going to be tied into it, explanations for bunkers. There was lots of conspiracy theory stuff. But I think, and completely rightly so, in hindsight, sitting down with Square and Titan, at the point where we were writing that game, writing this comic, the second game wasn't happening yet. There was the world was evolving. So I think what became clear is with the comic, the aim was to come up with something that was its own beast. Like it obviously we wanted it to be tied in, but I was getting a bit too carried away with like details from the game and like, I could play with this. But ultimately, part of the beauty of Life is Strange is things aren't explained. And they were absolutely right to pull up on that. So instead, we removed it a little more from the game. Still obviously very tying in, but we jumped forward. We allowed like a passage of time, so it wasn't quite so raw. And it also meant I could write it in a way that kept things like vague isn't the word. I mean, it is vague, I suppose, but keep things open, because we didn't know at that point what Life is Strange 2 was going to bring. We didn't know what it might throw in, how it might tie in. So it was sort of a case of come up with something that ties in, feels satisfying, but at the same time doesn't risk any spoilers for what might be coming in the game. Yeah. So it was a lot more challenging than it might at first appear. It was sort of like, and it was my first time writing for an artist as well. Like I was used to writing for myself, but writing on a license, tying it in with things, it was so exciting, but also crazy challenging. And there were always new things being thrown at me. So it was deep conspiracy theory stuff, which probably in hindsight was way too deep and way too explainy for the game. and could have closed off paths that we didn't want closed off. So I think what we ended up with was a lot better. And then by the end of issue 4, what I originally ended up with suddenly changed again. And again, now where I'm sitting now, I look at the series where we are now and I think it's so great that we had that room to play. We've been able to tell so many more stories. And now I know where it's going. I'm really excited to tell it. I think there was that awkward transition point of being like, we've gone from a mini series, from a standalone to an ongoing and everything that came with that. But where we are now, I think every choice that was made, they were the right choices. They were definitely the right choices.
You never know, Emma. They might bring you back to do this untold story. The way that the Life is Strange series is going.
I've just ruined it now, though, haven't I? No, I think probably it's probably safe to say now, because I think that time has passed. I think it would be. I think going back to Blackwell now, we're moving on both in the game and the comic. People are enjoying exploring new things. So I'd be very surprised if we got to go to deep dive back into that moment in time again. You never know.
Okay. And you're a big fan of the series, and from what I've read in the comics, there's so much fan service from the monument with Chloe Storm to the bathroom scenes. And I imagine that you wanted to deliver on that, but was there kind of like a threshold on your side where it was like, I don't want to do too much fan service just needlessly?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to draw a line, isn't it, to when is it fan service and when is it referencing and tying things into the game? I think, yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, I will say as well, it's not just me. What I love about this title, sorry, it's my phone buzzing. One of the things I love with working on this title is, especially when we started, we had obviously me writing, Claudia drawing, Andrea colouring, and at that point, Andrew James was our editor. He, funnily enough, now works at Square. But all of us were just huge fans of the game. So it meant we did early on get ourselves, so we would get carried away because you're like, oh my God, we could do this, we could do this. And then you'd have to step back and go, it's got to be in service of the story. And I think that's probably where the line is drawn. I think I love doing nods to things because it's stuff I'd want as well. So, I mean, you could call it fan service, having the flicker scene with Warren, for instance. In some ways you could say that's fan service because there'll be people out there who they might have seen Max and Warren together. They miss him as a character. It would be sad to have a comic and not feature him. So you could say, well, yeah, that is fan service. And I'd say, well, if it's making fans happy, then yeah, it's fan service. And I'm happy for it to be that. But I think if we'd thrown things in that you couldn't throw things in that weren't in the service of the story. So I think I'm all okay with fan service. I'm a fan. So I don't mind fan service in things I consume, so long as it doesn't detract from the story. I'm really glad that the things we put in, people were excited to see, because we had fun with them. And Claudia, I can't say enough amazing things about Claudia. There's so much stuff that she chose to put in that comic that I don't write details about what the characters are wearing, for instance. I'll give a sense, or the details of a location. So I remember writing the Bean Barn and the bar in Seattle, and I would describe areas of the Bean Barn, roughly what it looked like. But when her pages came back and she'd put various posters on the wall, or Chloe wearing that iconic zombie, with the hand coming up, just amazing. So, or the Dontnod, when she had the Remember Me t-shirt on, a lot of the visual stuff, that's Claudia. So she's also throwing in, she loves the title. So she throws fan service in, visual fan service as well. Yeah, I forget exactly what your question was. I know it was about fan service.
It was just about, did you have a threshold to not go overzealously with fan service? Yeah,
I'd say we did, and our threshold was it's got to be for the story. We can't randomly throw stuff in just because we want to see it. I think the flickers could have been dangerous. There were loads of things we could have shown with the flickers, because there were so many different paths that would have been fun to show, a whole path where Max's plant didn't die. But as it turned out, I think limiting it the way we did is what our threshold was. So I think people like Dana, it was interesting to explore that because we knew from the game there was a possibility, she'd been pregnant at some point and there was a possibility in some parallel universe somewhere she'd gone through and had that child, and that was an interesting thing to show just how different universes could be. So yeah, we definitely had to threshold ourselves, because otherwise we would have gone nuts. But always in service of the story.
Okay. We'll come on to Claudia in a little bit, because I've got a couple of things to ask you about Claudia. Cool. But specifically, sticking with that as well, on the fan service part, when I've read the comics, I really enjoy the dialogue. And for me and a lot of other fans, the Dontnod story and the characters, the dialogue was so important. How hard was it to kind of translate that over into a comic series, and especially in your own original work?
I mean, because I'd played the game, I think I was fairly immersed in that vernacular anyway. I think probably the hardest thing, though, was trying to capture I always wanted to capture the feel of it, but without ending up sounding like some dodgy parody of it, if that makes sense. Like, I didn't want it all to be Hella's Mosh Pit Shaka Bra. Like, there was stuff that was so, we can say as people who love the game, there's certain things that we can all admit, like, that's a crazy thing to say. Like, it works because it makes us think of Life is Strange, and we love it because it's that. But there were certain things I didn't want to carry through to the comics, because I knew if they were written on the page, they lose what they sound like in the game. And I didn't want us to sound like a derivative, like, hey, this is Life is Strange comic, this is how they speak. So it was trying to capture the sense of it without like using some of the direct phrases. I think we got the mood. I was quite chuffed with the mood we captured for them, and some of the responses early on made me feel so relieved, because it's so terrifying, like, we all love these characters, and we've all read things that are spun off from things we love that maybe they don't capture that sense of it that we want. So I think I put myself under a lot of pressure for that. I think the first, to my memory, you may have read it more recently than me, I think actually we used very few Hellas. I think the first time someone said, I think it must have been Chloe, says Hella the first time. And I can remember even scripting that first time and thinking, is this going to work? Or is it just going to sound like I'm taking the piss out of something I love? So some of it went in. I'm sorry, I'm just remembering back over early. I have to be careful, because I'm sure it'll come up later anyway, but because we're writing ahead, I've got to remember what's actually out and what's not out, so I don't want to reference things that aren't. So I'm trying to remember stuff from the first series, because I know it's safe. And hopefully we added to some of that vernacular. I remember early on, just where you're talking about the sort of dialogue, super early on, there was in fact, I think it might have been in the first issue, there was a bit where Pixie referred to Max as Maxi Max, which is like a stupid thing to say, but it's such a kind of is. And funny enough, the next line of dialogue, I think, is Max saying, when you call me that, you make me sound like a sanitary product or something. And because of where the page break was, Andrew, the editor at the time, he put a note on Maxi Max saying, no, this makes her sound like a sanitary product. And it was like, oh, actually, that's like the joke in the script. But sometimes it's hard to draw the line between things that sound bad and things that are riffing on the game.
Oh, fair point. But I do think the fact that you bring up the Hella thing does make sense, because I did see that and I was like, it's not as prevalent as I thought it'd be.
It's not. I mean, do you know what? I've started using it in real life. I say it now. So it went from something when I played the game being like, well, that's really, it's capturing this teen mode of language, and I loved it. And I would sort of, like a lot of us, be like, mosh pitch like a bra. But then I start saying them in real life. So actually it's self-fulfilling. So someone's absolutely gone into the comic, but I never wanted to throw it in too much.
Yeah, definitely. And so I've been reading the 3 volumes. So specifically on Dust, there are scenes where we see this timeline distort. So we see like little things change in the background. I think in the bathroom, you see the colours change. And you tweeted about it as well when fans were asking you about it. What was it like working with Claudia on that and just making those subtle additions in that first...
she's been so amazing. So with the flickers, all of that was scripted in. So they were all described. But you can imagine for an artist, and like that's the side I'm normally on with comics, for an artist to get this script that's like, oh, by the way, you've got to remember, so the script had to be very careful of when, like, we are now in a flicker. So the dialogue's continuing, like, for instance, when Max and Chloe are in the bathroom, dialogue's just continuing as if nothing's changed, except that suddenly some of the dialogue doesn't seem to fit the scene anymore. And it was it was poor Claudia is having to read these scripts and get her head around the fact, like, okay, you do know what you're doing here, right? People aren't going to think this is a mistake. And we had to sort of go into it trusting you guys, like trusting the readers and being like, no, they're going to know it's not a mistake. And actually, with some small ones, I think the very first, this is going back a bit now, but I think the first flicker is perhaps Chloe's hair. I think she gets a streak in her hair. And I think Claudia at one point, or it might have been Andrea, said, what if people think we've made a mistake and we've done a colouring mistake? And I was like, do you know what? That's great. Because that means they won't even think twice about it. They'll just be like, oh, well, that was a mistake. And then later, when they realise what's happened, they get to go back and find those moments. So she was just absolutely amazing. There's certain shots that stuck with me. There's one of Max in the bathroom when the graffiti behind her changes from a bunny to something else. And again, I'd written it in the script, but you can write something and not really visualize how good it's going to look. And then when it came back from her, I was like, they really got, because she's so detailed, so precise. She's just on top of everything. It means she's almost set the bar for herself so high. Because with Partners in Time, we're literally jumping between. I can say this now, right? Because the first issue's out. Yeah. But we're jumping between different timelines that have, some of them have the same characters in, some of them don't, and some of the changes are quite subtle. And even as me, I'm writing it. I'm doing this to myself. And I'll be writing scenes, like banging my head against the wall, being like, oh no, is that the version of them that had that conversation, or have they not? And like, we've made it hard on ourselves, but Claudia throughout is just, she's so good. This is her first big comic series, and
really,
yeah, I'm blown away by her. And Andrea, they're both just so good, and they capture that, like Andrea's just capture such a mood. I can't say enough good things about Claudia. She is just incredible.
No, I'm glad to hear that. And after I saw the first couple of changes, I was like looking at every single box to make sure that there was nothing I missed as well.
Because especially the dialogue changes were very confusing when Chloe starts talking about a different topic, and it's really, they're tricky. They are tricky.
So with Dust as well, I think for me, one of the big things that blew me away was when we had Rachel, Chloe, and Max in the same room. Essentially, like three characters that we never saw together, well, physically alive, but three characters like that together. Just talk me through that. What was it like bringing those scenes together? Was there kind of like a bit of nerves just putting the three of them in the same comic strip and being like, right?
Yeah, this is in the flicker, right? It was, bear in mind that at the point where we had that flicker, where Rachel, I think she turns up with a newspaper, doesn't she? I didn't know we were ever going to see Rachel again. Like, at that point, it was just an opportunity to be like, wouldn't it be great if we could just bring this character in who Max has never seen? Because sometimes you forget, especially if you played Before the Storm and you're invested in it, you're like, oh God, yeah, Max never knew Rachel. Like, she knew a presence of Rachel. She knew what Rachel meant to Chloe, but she never met her. So in that flicker, I remember being so excited because and nervous because you think, oh, this is so crazy. Thankfully, we'd set up this notion already that there were so many possibilities out there, and this was just one. So it was sort of, by that point, we were in a bit of a playground, so we could play with it, knowing we weren't taking away from anything, because obviously it was something none of us had seen before. But certainly writing that, I didn't know we were ever going to see Rachel again. We didn't know that Waves was going to come at that point. So it was at that point, we thought this is our one shot to get these three girls together. And it was really exciting. Just, there's a lot tied in with it. It was nerve-wracking trying to write it. Also, then you're writing it in a way where you're thinking, because you've got this snippet. The flickers were weird because you only ever got a snippet of another life. And in that short amount of time, what can you say? What can you not say? And my brain can't not ask all the questions like, well, are we jumping into a universe where her and Chloe are together? Are they just friends? Is this before that happened? There are so many factors. Is she with Frank? And you can't show any of that stuff. You've just got to focus on that moment in time. And again, I think just kudos to the readers picked up on that. And I think for all of us at that point, it was like, how great to see the three together. That's never going to happen again.
Yeah. Well, I'm personally glad that you did, because Rachel Amber's my favorite character. And specifically Yeah, when I made my way through more of the comics, obviously because this arc now starts to evolve, and we see the scenes where we have Max and Rachel together, and obviously you had source material to draw from with Chloe and Max specifically. But when you're developing those two characters together, specifically Max and Rachel, what was it like writing those scenes where you have two characters who are very different and now trying to mash them together?
I loved it. I mean, I loved it also because the Rachel who we see in the comics is not really the Rachel from the game. You know, she's a different universe. She's a Rachel that might have been. I see it very much as that's a Rachel. Did you play Before the Storm?
I did, of course.
Yeah, yeah, of course. I mean, I see very much that's Rachel who, when they were stood under the lamppost, they went. They ran away, and that's the life that they built. So it wasn't just writing a Rachel, because I mean, Rachel in the games, I was really interested in her, but I don't think I fell for her. Like, I thought she was a really interesting addition to the character. I could see what her presence meant to Chloe. And that was, for me as a player at the time, that was the most important thing about her, was what she'd, the imprint she'd left on Chloe. And you play Before the Storm and you get to know her more. And she's, she's a volatile person. She makes you a bit nervous, So with the comic, what was great is getting to play with a Rachel who actually wasn't that Rachel. So in some ways she felt like a new character, actually. And so for a writer, I mean, I'm used to writing my own stories. So coming into a title that I love, but getting to the most exciting thing other than being able to revisit stuff I love is getting to tell original stories and create characters and add characters to it. So with Rachel, it is Rachel, but it's a new version of her. She's a much more mellow version of herself. And also I got to actually have Rachel faced with the notion, like gradually learning this notion that what happened to her in another reality. And she's the only character I could have done that with. Well, at that point, she's the only character I could have done that with. And how wonderful to having that conversation with Max rather than with Chloe. I think that would have been the obvious choice, maybe would have been to have her and Chloe have a heart-to-heart about it. But to have Max be able to talk to her about the ghost of the girl that she knew, or that she knew of. It's a pretty powerful scene. And I think Rachel's come into her own a lot in the comics for people. I hope she's come into her own a lot because we didn't know we were even going to get to play with her. So to get to not only play with her, but to bring her story to the fore like that was, unexpected and really nice.
I'm very glad to hear that. And my next question is going to put you in a very difficult position. So we have
Okay.
Rachel Amber, Chloe Price, and Max Caulfield. Which is Emma's favourite to write and why?
Oh, that is a horrible question. I mean, I have to say Max, because Max is our viewpoint. She's our anchor. She's the person we're seeing this story through mostly. Obviously, that's changing a little bit in this series now that we get to play back in Dust. But there is so much in Max's head that I sometimes feel like there's just not enough words or time on the page to really get across what that girl's gone through. She's a fascinating character, and I think there's elements of her that we can't avoid. We empathize with elements of characters that we play, characters that we write. There'll be, I don't want you to get too personal about yourself, but there'll be reasons I assume that you connect to Rachel more than other characters. And I think Max, her primary directive is guilt, and I feel that that's something I can definitely tune into as a writer. And it's weird because sometimes she feels so hard about things she maybe doesn't have control over, or the fact we have that monologue to herself in waves where she's in a world where everyone's happy. This is good. Why can she not? She cannot be happy in this place because it's not where she's living with her mistakes. I really enjoy this notion of she had to come to terms with the fact that it's not good enough to just make those things go away because you haven't processed them. And processing things is so important. And we've watched Chloe process things. We haven't watched Max process them in the same way. So I think they're all fun to write. It's kind of fun writing Chloe and Rachel as a unit because they're happy. They get to be, it's a bit escapist, but the real meat for me of what makes Life is Strange what it is analyzing emotions and processing the things we go through and how they affect us. So I think for that reason, it has to be Max, because the whole comic is Max slowly understanding herself and why she feels the way she does and why she has to go back to where she can live in a world she made.
I'm very glad. I like Max as well, but specifically with the comics as well, I'm a big fan of how she has the blue butterfly on her wrist as a tattoo, and even the dreamcatcher as well. I just like the kind of symbolism with that. Did you have any input with that, or was that specific Claudia and Andrea's kind of input on that?
The tattoo was me. I knew I wanted her to have that. So I remember writing the very first scene for Waves, and in the script it was all about the fact we don't see her face, but we see a hand reach for a coffee cup with the butterfly on the wrist. So that bit I knew I wanted that. The Dreamcatcher, that's Claudia. That's anything that's general outfits, aside from the watches. The watches are very much written in from the beginning for a good reason. So the watches and the tattoo, but everything beyond that is Claudia. It's just her magic of throwing in little elements that just sort of capture a certain thing. She's just great for that. She's so good for that.
I'm glad to hear that as well. And obviously where we're at now with the time with issue 13, I've seen that now we have 2 stories running parallel, and we see 2 Chloes now with different hairs as well. Like, was there no reason to kind of keep them the same, or did you specifically want them to have different color hairs?
Well, there's like 2 reasons. And again, I thank like Claudia and Andrea for we had this conversation because they care about the details. The first reason was obviously that we've got 2 universes now. It's confusing. Ideally, we want ways for the readers to be able to pick up on which one we're in right away. And this is going to be obvious things like if Tristan's there, you know where you are. If Max is there, you know where you are. But if you're seeing Chloe on her own, you want to know which universe you're talking about. But there's another reason as well. We didn't when we started, but now we kind of know how her hair might end up. So we have to assume it's going to get there. So her hair's going to change at some point. So I mean, Claudia and Andrea, down to the fact that they've literally looked up what happens to hair dye at certain stages, like how it would change from one to the other. Like, they're amazing. But certainly it being longer and a slightly different shade, the main thing is it just makes it easier to tell the universes apart, because otherwise it's going to be very confusing.
Okay, I thought I'd just check that just to make sure, double check it. And
yeah.
So I found something very interesting with the Waves volume that I have. At the end, you say that there's a 2-year time jump and that there was a change to the girls' appearances. And with that, there's a note as well. You said that we have some of the designs that Claudia did, but then you guys decided not to go with the drastic changes. I just wanted to know why you didn't go with the drastic change in their appearances, especially with the 2-year jump.
Okay, well, that might be. Do you know, to be honest, I don't know whether I saw the drastic change appearances. I'm wondering which ones they were now. Because there's some stuff that I'm not. There'll be work where Claudia's working with Titan. I remember seeing some really cool designs, though. I would imagine from a licensing perspective, it might have been something where Square and Titan said it's just, if we change them too drastically, it could throw people off, even though time's passed. We want to make sure people know exactly who they're looking at. It could have been that. I would imagine that was the reason, just to keep things consistent. So it's annoying because obviously, we know 2 years has passed. I mean, honestly, I don't think it would have been a problem because the readers are very tuned in. People are going to know who they're looking at. But I suppose there's that possibility that someone's going to a comic shop, they're flicking through an issue, and they don't recognize the people on the page, and they might not realize who they're looking at if they've not followed the comic. So it's probably just, to keep it consistent.
Okay, well, I'll check. And the next one's going to be a tough one. So what was the most difficult scene for you to write in the series so far?
Do you mean difficult as in it hurt to write it, or difficult as in I banged my head against a wall lots of times?
Let's do both. I want to hear both of these now.
So difficult as in it hurt to write it. I mean, I'm not ashamed to admit there are definitely scenes that I've sat writing them in tears, like, because there's some emotional stuff, and when you're writing it, you're not skimming over it. You have to be in every word, and I have to like read scenes back. I have to act them out to myself, or they don't sit right for me. So then I'll be like reading back scenes. I kind of know it's working if I can make myself cry because I know what's coming. So I'm like, okay, if I can get emotional, that's probably good. I think the goodbye with Joyce was really painful. That was really upsetting. Just that the idea of for both Max and Chloe, I think, but for Chloe, knowing that her mum was that close that she's right there and she can't see her. Like that was painful. There've been a few. I think there's quite a few where I think when the times where Max seems like she's giving up, that hurts me, because obviously we're rooting for her. So she's had those moments, certainly in the transect when, you know, Tristan's gone through and she sort of thinks, well, maybe this is it. Maybe this is how it's meant to go. Those are painful because that's not what we want for her. Like, we wanted to fight through. So yeah, in terms of the emotional things, Joyce and just when Max seems close to breaking, because you're like, come on, Max, you got this. And in terms of banging my head against a wall, probably all of Partners in Time so far. And I have no one to blame but myself. It's in this case, no one told me to do it. It's entirely my fault. But I mean, you get a sense, and it's good we can have this talk now that the first issue's out. But even like what seems like a small thing. So obviously we know that Lawrence has an accident in one and not in the other, because in one Max could rewind it, in the other she couldn't. So instantly that gives me a branch, and then I've got two forking realities, and so I have to. And there's a reason. You know, everything's going to have a reason. Some of them are going to be small reasons. Some are going to be bigger reasons. Part of it is just to make sure the two worlds are very separate, but some of it ties in with story. And it means that throughout, I've set this challenge for myself and for Claudia of having to be like, oh no, he's got a bandage on in that one. He hasn't got one on in that one. Or like, yeah, Chloe's hair's this length here, it's not here. Or they had this conversation here, but they haven't had that conversation there. Or which universe is Tristan in right now? Like, it's really hard, like fun, but hard. And I've certainly had moments where I've been writing it and I've just thought, what am I doing? Why have I set myself this challenge? It's so stupid. But I think what I've always tried to do with the comics is, we're not a game. It's not interactive, which is what we're used to from this title. So it's trying to find a way to make a comic as interactive as I can make it, with the exception of it being like a choose your own adventure comic, which would have been really cool. The only other way I can think to do it is to just throw challenges out to the readers so that there's stuff that they need to be picking up on and following through. It just makes it feel a little bit more interactive. So I don't regret the decision, but I hate myself sometimes.
No, I feel for you. When I was reading that first issue from Partners in Crime, I was like, a lot of effort going into this, kind of like jumping between timelines. I was like, and to get everything back into one loop. I was like, okay.
Yeah, and you can imagine for poor Claudia, like at the very end of, was it the very end of Strings that the Hamlet cast appeared? Actually, fun factoid, that schedule were mad around then. So the very first scene that has all the Hamlet cast in it, I penciled those pages because poor Claudia was like, she works so bloody hard. They really work her. And I think she rightly so reached a point where she was like, you want me to design however many it is, like 10 new characters who are going to be in like a few panels. So she obviously inked it, but I got to pencil those ones. And yeah, we've thrown a lot of characters into the mix. Partly because, again, we want the comic to feel like its own. We need more characters to play with to make this story work, just so you've got pieces on the board. But also, the more new characters we can throw in, the more it feels like something that's not just a derivative of the game. It's something where we want people to care about and be invested in new characters, because that's what gives the comic its own life.
Amazing. So I've asked you what the most difficult scene to write was. What was your personal favourite scene from the comics series so far?
Okay, well, I think, again, there's like favourite in terms of how it made me feel and favourites in terms of the easiest to write. Sorry for my voice, I can feel it going.
No, that's fine.
So favourite in terms of easiest to write, pretty much every time a decent conversation is set up. If I know I've got the right characters in the right place and we've got the right setup and they start talking, sometimes those scenes just flow. Like, they're so... It's a really lovely thing about writing, and anyone listening to this who writes themselves will know exactly what I mean, where sometimes if you've got if the right characters are in the right scenario, you don't need to think about it, because you know those characters back to front, you know how they're going to react to things, and you can just sort of set them off. So those are joyful. So pretty much most times I have the three girls in any, where if Max and Chloe are talking, funnily enough, with Max and Rachel, I found their talking was quite natural. I think because they didn't know each other, but I knew each of them. So that flowed quite nicely. But in terms of favorite scenes to write, how they make me feel, it's going to be a really random one. But I really like the little scene where Chloe and Max are having their heart-to-heart after Max's admission, and Rachel has kind of gone off for some space, and she meets up with the high seas. I think partly for me because that was a bunch of characters who mostly are new to the comic, even though Rachel isn't, that version of Rachel is. And it's one of the only scenes where we had an entire scene that didn't have Max or Chloe in it. And I've just got a soft spot for the high seas anyway. And I thought the little conversation between her and Dex and what it revealed, and the hopefully making it natural and subtle but still revealing, was, yeah, I think I liked writing that. I liked how it came out.
So Emma, I promise you I'm not rewinding time, by the way, because the fact that you mentioned the high seas is perfect, because I was going to ask you, what was the inspiration behind the high seas?
Segue. The inspiration behind them, I guess, initially just that once we knew the comic was going to be set a couple of years after the game, or a year after the game, and it was going to be in Seattle, it wasn't enough to just fling Max and Chloe into Seattle, and I needed to have a life because they'd been there for a year, and whatever they're dealing with, you're going to be around people. So I wanted them to have a base, like a place that they hang out. Like an equivalent of the diner. I wanted them to have people who are around them. And so I started to extrapolate out and think, well, who are the sorts of people they'd likely meet? They're going to go to some hipster place. They're going to drink coffee. Also, what skills have they got at their disposal? The fact that, Max, she takes photographs. Who's she likely to meet through photographs? So I kind of built this scenario in my head that maybe they'd moved to Seattle and they started going to this bar because it's quite close by to where they live. And there's this band there who, oh my God, they dress as pirates, which obviously that, for starters, is kind of cool for Max and Chloe. So it would be a nice connecting thing for them. They maybe came and watched a few gigs. And then eventually they started chatting, and then Max was like, hey, if you want some good photos, I can do some photos. And then Chloe starts doodling logos. So I wanted it to seem like a group of people who they could have naturally met, rather than throwing them into work friends or, just random people. So the inspiration was just giving Max and Chloe a universe. But in the process of doing that, we got to just create this crazy pirate band, which is so much fun. And I think I wanted to call them the High Seas. Partly, obviously, it's because it's a terrible pun, and I love that. But I always remember reading Lord of the Flies at school, and I can remember one of the kids in Lord of the Flies says at one point, I should be leader because I can sing C#, something like that. And I just like this idea of if you can sing a high C, you're boss. so it became, this terrible pun name of the High Seas. I'm going to assume Tammy has a very broad vocal range, unlike me right now. They were a world for Max to play in, but in the process of doing it, we just had such a fun group of characters, and we just wanted them to be people you could relate to. They're nerds, but also I wanted all of them to have their own character, which slowly we're starting to see more of in the comic, because obviously you don't get crazy amounts of time with them. They're only side characters up to now, but I wanted them all to stand out. You could imagine as a reader, if you were having a conversation with one of them, roughly the sort of stuff you talk about. I wanted them to feel alive. So yeah.
No, so I'm glad that you mentioned that as well, because one thing I thought he stayed very true to the series was with the representation and characters. With Life is Strange, it was touching on LGBT and representation. And from my background as well, one of the characters that really stood out was Pixie, and especially with the headscarf. It was something that I just didn't expect, but when I saw it, I was like, it's natural. And because it was in Life is Strange, I was like, it's so there. So just talk me through that. Was that always intended for a character to be like Pixie, to have a headscarf, and then all the diverse other characters that were in the series?
So a lot of the visual stuff, I think when I wrote them, I absolutely, of course, I wanted it to be inclusive. It was always going to be a queer comic because Life is Strange is, it should be an inclusive comic. I thought with the comic, we've got an opportunity here to do a bit more with that, especially because, we're starting with Max and Chloe. So you've already got, two white characters leading it. So surely whatever we can do to just make things look a bit different around them would be great. So so I think my descriptions to Claudia, and again, it's testament to Claudia, description originally, I think I can't remember exactly what it was, but I was relatively sparse on the details. I think I was basically like, Pixie wears a hijab, you can choose nationality. I think I just said like, yeah, Tammy black, Dwight black, Dex is trans. I think some people have picked up on that. I don't know whether everyone has, but so I would just basically say, yeah, this is, trans, white. So I'd put these small ideas in, and then Claudia would come back with these designs. So I knew I wanted Pixie to be this tiny, she's just this tiny ball of energy, basically. In a hijab, a ball of energy in a hijab, that's Pixie. But then with drumsticks. But when one of the first designs that Claudia sent back, and I don't know how many people spotted this, but it's Pixie, and she's wearing an Akira t-shirt. She's wearing like the Japanese Akira t-shirt, which, I mean, I don't think I'd even said to Claudia, like I'd explained her as being like this energetic, but I hadn't necessarily said she's a nerd. Like I hadn't thrown that. So for Claudia to send her back wearing a Kira t-shirt, I was like, oh my God, that's her. So yeah, I think there's parts of both of us. There's what I wrote them to be, and then there's what Claudia drew them to be. So yeah, she really brought them to life. Similarly, Dex's hair, like I wouldn't have thought to give him pink hair. Like that's really cool. So her visuals are amazing. But I'm really glad that you were happy to see Pixie. That's awesome.
No, I was just very happy because I was like, it's just not seen, like, games are solely touching on that kind of stuff, but not on that level. And just to see a character like that, I was kind of like, it was warming to see it kind of being embraced in a comic series like this as well.
Yeah, we're getting there. We're seeing change, but it's slow, isn't it? We need more.
Definitely. And with Claudia, we've mentioned her a lot. So I've dug up 3 tweets, 2 of them, which was when you first met Claudia at Forbidden Planet, and then later that year you met Andrea with Claudia as well.
Oh yeah.
And because people, I've read up on it as well, that the creative process of building the comic isn't as simple as people thinking that you're all in the same room. But like, what was it like to finally all 3 of you to come together at those events and just kind of like have that experience of like, yeah, we worked on this series and we have the chance to meet? It
was so great. Because I mean, especially Andrea. So Claudia, yes, of course, met the first time on Forbidden Planet, which seems weird now. But because I knew her, I'd seen her work, obviously, the very first time I went into Titan. We were presented with about 6 artists who, like, we were looking at their work, and it was a case of which, choose an artist. So, I mean, that's in itself quite stressful because I'm used to being on the other side of the table. Like, normally the artist is being, looked at. So I remember looking at her work, and you can get a sense of someone from their work, and it just stood out to me right away. But when I met her, I think my first thought was like, she's so cool. She's like, she just looks really cool. Oh God, I feel so old and boring. But it made sense as soon as I saw her. I was like, yeah, that makes sense where your art comes from. And I think sometimes maybe one of the things that is easy to forget when you're reading the comics as well is it's not just that we don't see each other, it's that they're in Italy. Like it's a completely different, and Andrea, I mean, Claudia speaks amazing English. Actually, she'll tell you she doesn't, she puts herself down, but she is so good. But even then, to be reading scripts in English that are quite wordy scripts, that's a huge deal. And yet to do the job she does. And Andrea, he doesn't speak as much. He does speak some, but not as much. So when we actually met up, that was in Lucca last year. Was it last year or the year before? So it was, a proper reunion. It was really cool to actually see them. And it was funny because I'm used to interacting with them. If I do, it's always by email, which is all written in English. So I mean, I feel so bad about that. I mean, I'm half Italian. I should be trying to speak in Italian. They're so good. But it was that funny thing where we meeting Andrea in Lucca and realizing, oh yeah, we speak different languages. It's so crazy. But yeah, they're great. They're really great. I know they've got some projects they want to work on together. And Andrea's worked with me since he did some stuff for Crater, which is a comic we did recently. So I brought him on as a colorist for that. Because again, he's quite new, I think, but he's so good. So I'm hoping we get to see lots more of them.
I hope so as well. And we hopefully this episode gets out before the next issue comes out. I'm hoping that I get that done. But like, what teasing us? Like, what can we expect in the next 3 issues of this series?
Oh God. What can you expect to see? So the seeds are in, I think, like from that first issue. Obviously, if we'd been having this interview when we planned in July and you said, what's coming in Partners in Time? I wouldn't have been able to say anything, I don't think. We're obviously, we're going to continue jumping between 2 timelines. What can I say specifically? Blimey.
If anything, will it help? Will we see more Gladys? That's all I mainly care about, if anything.
I mean, yeah, they've got to get places, so you're definitely going to see more Gladys. It's really hard to say because, like so much with Life is Strange, it's not going to be like there's going to be this huge event. It's going to be lots of small things that are building up. So I think just be prepared to keep tracking which universe is which. There's going to be certain interactions that could only happen in one universe, and there's going to be some that could happen in both universes but are only going to happen in one. As released, there is a face from the past that you are going to see. And the next issue, I can tell you, is really fun. Like, okay. as soon as I was told that, because the road trip, I'm loving it. It wasn't necessarily something I was going to do originally. It was an idea that came from Square, and actually it's ending up being a lot of fun. And what I did know is the moment that a road trip was on the cards, the place they go next issue, I wanted to put an issue there. So, so yeah, just because I had a fun idea. So playing that out has been great.
Amazing. And so I've had my say of like a lot of questions, and I've got a couple of ones from my subscribers who took to Instagram and put their questions forward. If everyone's question didn't get picked, I got quite a few. I do apologize, but I picked out a couple of them here. So the first one's from Amber Ang 2000, and they asked, what is your favorite moment from making the Life is Strange comic? And I imagine that's generally speaking as well.
Favorite moment from making it? I mean, I guess outside of the actual physical act of writing, there'll be 2. There'll be the very first time I found out I got the job, before the fear kicked in, like when I was just still going, woohoo, before I started to go, oh no, I'm going to mess it up. So yeah, probably finding out I got it was amazing. And then the other would have been the first time I went to a convention after the announcement, because I think a lot of, it's like, it shouldn't be scary, but it is, because I know how much people love it. I know how much I love it. So I put a lot of pressure on myself. So the first time going to a convention and having people coming up to the table and just us all getting really excited together about it, that was really magical, because it was just that thing of like, this game was out, I think at that point it had been out 4 or 5 years before. Yeah. So there's that slight thought where you think, are people going to care? Are there enough people who want this? And so to all kind of have a massive nerd out at the table at a convention about it was really nice. And that was when I felt like, yes, there's definitely still love for this.
Glad to hear that. So the next question, I will preface, the person is not hating as well as they said in their message.
Good.
But this is from Mindrew_music, and they ask, can you give one specific reason why people should read the comic after they've played the game?
Why they should? Wow. I mean, I don't know. Because I guess I should be saying they should, because it's great. But I mean, to be honest, if the game satisfied you and you don't want any more, then you wouldn't need to read the comic. But I think, I mean, really, if you just feel like you haven't quite let go of those characters and you just want to spend a little bit more time with them and potentially see where Max's story could go. And from the get-go, we've always said the comic is a chance to play. You know, it's a possibility. So I think, yeah, if you're not needing more Life is Strange in your life, then don't. But if you find yourself thinking, actually, I kind of want to explore a bit more, I want to just play and see what could happen in the Life is Strange universe, that's why you want to read the comic.
Amazing. And the next one's a very difficult question. So this comes from Andrew Montes, and he asks, does Emma Vieceli save Chloe at the end of episode 5 or not?
Well, someone was going to ask it. Well, I mean, obviously I've played both because we all do. You have to know. My first playthrough, I did not save Chloe. I know. No, I didn't. I think because at the time, I mean, my God, I spent a long time making that decision. It was horrible. But I weighed up and I just thought of the amount of other people it was going to affect. And ironically, as someone who obviously that was 5 years before I ever knew I'd be writing a bloody comic about it, I remember thinking like, but what would that do to them? Like, how would they feel? How do you live your life if you know that, you know, your mum has died for you? I don't, you know, it was such a stressful thought of how they would cope afterwards. So I didn't end up saving Chloe. And so the joke was on me when then 5 years later, I wrote that anyway. But obviously, like most people who play it, I finished it and then I played it again and then I saved Chloe.
Do you know what, I'll just say to you two things. Like, I'm doing my Life After Strange series at the minute, which was with voice actors. I'm interviewing them, and a lot of them have said the ending that you've picked, which is surprises me a little bit. But like, and secondly as well, I ended the town within about 30 seconds of that choice coming up because I was like, me and Chloe just like set sail into the distance, and I was like, see you later.
You know, respect, and that's the thing. It's choices. Every choice is valid. You know, I absolutely respect that choice. I don't know. I mean, sometimes I wonder, I wouldn't want to in any way assume or guess your age. I don't know how much of it's an age thing. I think sometimes, like, I'm in my 40s. Like, I'm an old lady for Life is Strange. And I don't know, maybe, no, I don't know. I don't know what the reasons are. I couldn't do it.
If it gives you any reassurance,
weird,
Emma, I saw your age on Google and I did not believe it for a minute. I did not believe that. Yeah, I did not believe that for a minute. I was like, I literally looking at it, I was like, no, not a chance.
Yay. So actually, I'm going to go with that. Google lies. I'm 30. It's a lie. But I never grew up, so it's fine. I'm 15 at heart. Yeah, that's interesting that the voice actors, a lot of them went that way.
Mm-hmm.
Huh. What, even Nathan?
I think he actually saved Chloe. Nick Schreiner, I think he saved Chloe. He was like, I think Chloe and Nathan would make up and be like, they'd have a bit of a soft spot for each other, and they're just like,
see, I'd love that. Sails. They're the comic I'd write. Awesome.
There we go.
It's yeah, it was a horrible choice that Dontnod threw at us, and they knew it. They're evil like that. Especially when you'd spent a game with so many minor choices that like cause little fractions. Oh, that's done that. I'm going to put that back in the bin, and then suddenly, like, yeah, I think that and the other one when Chloe asking you to turn off a machine, they were the two that just horrible.
Okay. So if you think that's horrible, the next question is very horrible because this is a really hard one. So this comes from their ex, and they ask, do you have a favorite comic cover and why?
Ooh, I think what's funny is I don't see the covers until they're out there. I see some of Claudia's because they're in the Dropbox, but the variants I often don't really get to see. I'll get the comps and I'm like, oh, cool. There was one particular variant, which I'm going to be terrible now because I cannot remember the name of the artist, which I absolutely loved. Because, I mean, Claudia's hands down. I think she's a genius. She keeps coming up with these amazingly poignant images. I don't know how she keeps doing that. But there was one variant cover that was like a bluey green, and it had the Max was in the front. It had a spiral, and it was... Oh, I can't remember who the artist was. It was absolutely beautiful. I think that visually that was one of my favorites. For Claudia's covers, she's very clever with them. I think what's almost a shame with comics is they release the covers so early, which is frustrating actually, because you almost wish, can you not just release it with a blank cover and then people see it later? But I think probably was it issue 2 that she did the one with Max standing with all the ghosts around her. I think that might have been issue 2.
Yeah.
And I loved that instantly you could see that was Joyce and that was Warren, and that like it was a really poignant image, I think. So that's quite powerful.
Okay. And the final subscriber question, and this is a couple of questions in one, and it'll give you a bit of a break from Life is Strange as well, just to let you know. So this one comes from Manuel The Freestyler, and he they ask, how did you get into drawing in the first place? Was it a hobby you picked up as a child? And do you have any tips or recommendations for people that are trying to improve?
All right. I got into it probably the way a lot of people do. I just really liked comics, and I liked video games, and I liked cartoons. So I consumed a lot, and I used to write stories. So I was actually writing before I was drawing. But I used to, what's funny, and I've told this story a few times, but I would write stories and I would draw pictures. Most of it would be fan art. Obviously, like most of us starting out, I draw characters from my favorite comics. But I never at any point thought, oh, I could put the two together. Because I was reading comics and I was drawing pictures and I was writing stories, but I did not think I could make comics. It just wasn't something that crossed my mind. It didn't seem as obvious back then somehow. I thought comics just fell from trees or something. So a lot of my drawing was just for fun. And then at one point I met a bunch of friends at my first ever anime con, and we formed Sweat Drop. Well, I think they were already Sweat Drop. And it was ultimately just a group of us. We were like a circle, you'd call it in Japan, where we would get a table at a convention, we'd split the cost, we'd all have our own comics, and they were like proper old school folded and stapled comics, and we'd sell them for 50p on the table. And I will never forget the first of I did a series called Dragonair through Sweat Drop, and the first issue of that, which would look awful now, absolutely awful. But I was so proud because I'd done it, and to have an issue, it was just a 20-page issue, folded, stapled, and to know that people were paying 50p and picking it up and reading it was just so exciting. So it was always for fun. For a long time it was for fun because I didn't think it could be a job. I think things are quite different now. It feels more feasible and achievable. But when you didn't have the internet, it just didn't seem very, very reachable. And if anything, the first time I was being paid to draw was more through video games. So I was working for a video game company. And then I started doing, I think through Sweat Drop, we would do more sort of talks and facilitating events to help other people who wanted to be drawing. It was more like a let's all get together and create together, those kind of things. And by doing that, I got to meet the sorts of people who then would put my name forward for things. And then probably the turning point was I entered the Tokyo Pop Rising Stars of Manga in 2007 or 2006. And I was a runner-up in that. But the editor at the time who'd seen my stuff, which again would be awful if you saw it now, but thankfully the editor saw a bit of promise and kept an eye on me. And around the same time, Manga Shakespeare started, which is my kind of first break into doing stuff professionally. And that editor from the competition, when Vampire Academy came up at Penguin, he was working at Penguin, and so he reached out. So I think the message to that is just to take every opportunity. If there's competitions, if there's ways you can get involved with stuff, because honestly, there's no set path. You can't predict what's going to be the thing that gets you work. I find the best thing is just kind of being nice to people and putting yourself out there, helping people when you can, and hopefully karma does its thing. But in terms of how to get better at drawing itself, I don't know what level the person asking is at, so they might be amazing. But I think a good bit of advice, firstly, to draw all the time, like just draw something every day, keep drawing. And if you feel yourself if you're drawing the same thing a lot, and we've all done it. I used to it was always drawing half a face with hair over here, always drawing the same thing. Challenge yourself. So if you start to feel stale or you think I'm not improving, it's probably because you're doing the same thing that you're already good at. And you can't get better by doing the thing you're already good at. So challenge yourself to draw something you really don't want to draw. For me, it was cars. That's my first thing I hated to draw. But yeah, drawing pretty people or drawing people kissing. I love doing that. But ask me to draw. I've just been drawing some pages. Actually, I had to draw a load of sharks. I'd never drawn a shark before. So it's oh, this isn't as fun. But that's how you're going to get better, when it's stuff that you're not used to drawing.
That's very valuable advice, and thank you to everyone who submitted questions. Emma, before we wrap up here, I've got one final question. It's going to be a very difficult one as well. So let me paint you this picture. Emma Vieceli's at her workstation. Yeah. She's finished writing the comic book series. She's done with Life is Strange, and the next minute, a flicker happens, and she gets transported to the Two Whales Diner. She's just sitting there with her books and stuff, and at a table, and the next minute Joyce Price comes up to her and asks Emma the most important question of her life: bacon omelette or Belgian waffle?
Oh, I'd say Joyce, you know me. I'm in here all the time and I always get both. Do I have to choose? Do I really have to choose?
Yes, for this part.
Can I put the bacon on the waffle?
I'll allow it. I'll allow you that.
Is that allowed?
Yeah.
I'll put the bacon on the waffle. I love that question. That's great.
Thank you. That was the first question I wrote as well.
I like that. We should just do it all like that. In this flipper.
But thank you everyone for watching. I hope you enjoyed this interview. If you did, leave a subscribe, drop a rating, comment. Emma, thank you so much for the time. I've kept you talking for so long with a really bad voice.
It's my own fault. I talk far too much, so I apologize if my voice sounds hideous. And this is the first time I've had a proper conversation in months, so unfortunately you got the short end of me going, how do I talk? I can't remember.
No, I fully appreciate it, and it's been wonderful to chat with you. If everyone's watching, go and check out the rest of the comic series. It's going to be amazing. I can't wait to read it myself. And we'll see you next time. Stick around with more Life is Strange content coming. Take care, guys.
Bye.